Hi, I'm Kalen, the Technical Training Manager here at Pivot Cycles. In my over 2 decades of bike industry experience, I've answered a lot of questions on how to set up bikes. And today we're going to look at the most important thing for suspension setup, setting your sag. Setting sag is always the first step in suspension setup and a key factor in getting the most out of your suspension. Before you begin, refer to Pivot Suspension Setup Guide for the recommended settings you'll need throughout the process. If you already have settings you like, make sure to write those down before you begin setting sag. Setting sag is most easily done with a partner. You can do it yourself if you have a level surface and something to steady yourself while sitting on the bike. For this process, all you need is a shock pump and a measuring tape. If this is the first time you're setting sag, make sure all lockouts are off, and open your rebound and compression settings by turning the dials all the way counterclockwise. If you're just double checking sag, you don't need to open your rebound and compression all the way. Just give a firmer bounce on the saddle when you're checking sag. The first step in the process is to air up your fork and shock to our recommended air pressures based on your rider weight. This will be a good starting point that you may adjust during the sag process. The recommended fork air pressure can be found in our suspension setup guide. For most shocks, a good starting point is your rider weight in pounds plus 20 psi. This will get you close to the sag measurement and will adjust later to get you the correct sag. While airing up the suspension, keep the shock pump connected to the valve and compress the suspension. Doing this will equalize the chambers in the shock or fork to give you a more accurate reading. Now that you have a good starting air pressure for your fork and shock, put all your riding gear on, including a hydration pack if you wear one. Now stand up on the pedals and bounce a few times to cycle the suspension. Then sit firmly down on the seat, making sure to keep your feet on the pedals and stay still on the saddle. Slide the O-ring of the shock and fork up against the outer dust seal and gently step off the bike without compressing the suspension. If you happen to compress the suspension, you'll need to redo this step. Pivot sag measurements are done with the rider sitting in the saddle, so it's important to remain seated while setting the O-ring to get a proper measurement. Air shocks on pivot bikes feature a proprietary sag indicator that makes setting sag easy. Just line the O-ring up with the red line on the indicator. For shocks like the Float X2, refer to our suspension setup guide for the proper sag reference point. After the rider is dismounted, check where the O-ring sits in relation to the sag indicator's red line. If the O-ring is below the indicator line, add more air. If the O-ring is above the line, let some air out. When making these adjustments, remember to compress the suspension to make sure the pressure is equalized. After adjusting the air pressure, repeat the previous process until the proper sag is achieved. Fork sag should be very close using Pivot Suspension Setup Guide, but you can also measure the O-ring's position to double check that it is 15 to 20% of total fork travel. After sag is set, replace the air caps and adjust rebound and compression. Refer to Pivot Suspension Setup Guide for rebound and compression settings for a new bike, or adjust to your preferred settings. Your suspension sag is now set and you're ready to hit the trails. Thanks for watching, and let us know in the comments if you have any questions or have a topic you'd like us to cover.